In this lesson, we're going to solve absolute value equations. So first of all, in example 1, how do I evaluate absolute value expressions? So let's go ahead and evaluate the absolute value of -4. Remember that when we're finding the absolute value of a number, that it is a distance a number is away from 0. And because we're measuring 0, it is always going to be positive. So the absolute value of -4 is +4 because it takes 4 steps to go from 0 to -4 on the number line. For number 2, we've got the absolute value of 4. Again, the absolute value of 4 is going to be 4 because it is going from 0 to 4. It's going to take you 4 steps to get to that 4 on the number line, and notice how they're both positive answers. So number 3, we're going to evaluate -4 times x minus 5, or the absolute value of x minus 5 plus 2 when x is equal to 1. So let's go ahead and plug in our variable 1 minus 5 and then absolute value plus 2. All right, so remember we have to apply the order of operations. So please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. All right, so we do not have any parentheses. However, inside of the absolute value symbol, that acts as parentheses there, so you have to start by simplifying that. So I'm going to take my 1 minus 5. So I'll have 4 times the absolute value of -4 plus 2. All right. Now we don't have any exponents, but we do have this absolute value, and that absolute value is on the same level of the exponents. So let's go ahead and we're going to take and we're going to simplify that by taking the absolute value of -4. So we have -4 now times the absolute value of -4 is 4, and then plus 2. And then we remember we multiply and divide from left to right and add and subtract from left to right. So I'm going to have -16 plus 2, and then that's going to be equal to -14. All right, so how do I solve absolute value equations? We're going to solve the equation if possible. So first of all, what we're going to do is we're going to make this into 2 equations. Because we've got the absolute value of x, we're going to remove those absolute value symbols and we're going to say x is equal to 3. And then we're also going to say that x is equal to -3. And let's talk about that. So when you think about what x can be a 3 because the absolute value of 3 is 3. And then the absolute value of -3 is also equal to 3. So they're both going to be answers. So we have x is equal to 3 and we have x is equal to -3 for our answers. All right, question number 2. So again, we're going to make this into 2 separate equations. I'm going to have x plus 2, and that's going to be equal to 9. And then I'm going to have x plus 2 is equal to -9. And let's talk about why. Because if I'm looking for that value of x, so what plus 2 is going to equal 9, or the absolute value? So 7 plus 2 is equal to 9, and the absolute value of 9 is 9. Now, the value inside there also can be -9 because the absolute value of -9 is 9, and that is why it separates into 2 separate equations when we go to solve these. And so I'm going to subtract the 2, and we already said that x is equal to 7 because 7 plus 2 is 9, and the absolute value of 9 is 9. And then if I subtract my 2 here, I have x is equal to -11 because -11 plus 2 is equal to -9, and the absolute value of -9 is 9. All right, question number 3. We have 2 times the absolute value of 4 plus 2. Now, do not confuse this with -2 times 4x plus 2. That would have a parentheses. This is not a parentheses, so we cannot distribute that negative. So we ask ourselves then, what is that -2 doing to that absolute value? Because you want to isolate the absolute value piece first. So the -2 is multiplying it. So I'm going to divide by -2 on both sides. And we have the absolute value of 4x plus 2 is equal to then 2. Now that the absolute value part is all isolated, that's when then we can take it and we can move it into two separate equations. We're going to have 4x plus 2 is equal to positive 2, and then we're going to have 4x plus 2 is equal to negative 2. So then we're going to solve. All right, so x is equal to 0. That's one of our answers. And then we're going to have 4x is equal to negative 4, and we divide by 4. And our other answer is x is equal to negative 1. All right, for our next one then, again, we want to start by isolating that absolute value piece. So you're not going to be separating it into two separate equations until it's isolated. So just like a two-step equation, we would start by undoing the addition and subtraction. So I have 3 times 2x minus 7 is equal to then 9. And now I want to isolate it by dividing by 3. And now that I have the absolute value of 2x minus 7 is equal to 3, that's when we can separate it off into two separate equations. So I have 2x minus 7 is equal to 3, and then 2x minus 7 is equal to negative 3. And then we're just going to solve each of them individually. So x is equal to 5. And then we're going to add 7. And then we'll have x is also equal to 4. All right, question number 5. Now let's look at this carefully. The first thing I have to do is I have to isolate that absolute value piece. So I'm going to do that by subtracting the 4 on both sides. And I'm going to have the absolute value of 2x minus 1 is equal to negative 1. Now, I want you to think about what we've said about absolute value. And because absolute value is distance, absolute value is always going to be positive. So after you isolate your absolute value part, if it's ever equal to a negative, that means it's a no solution. You cannot have the absolute value of anything be, or a number, be equal to a negative. So therefore, this is a no solution. All right, in question number 6, again, we're going to isolate this absolute value piece. So I'm going to minus the 3 on both sides. And I have negative 2 times 1/3 x minus 5 is equal to 6. Now we're going to divide by a negative. And then I've got 1/3 x minus 5 is going to be equal to negative 3. And again, now that my absolute value part is isolated, and notice how it's equal to a negative 3 there, therefore it's going to be a no solution. Okay, for example number 3, we're going to be looking at absolute deviation. So it says the absolute deviation of a number x is from a given value is the absolute value of the difference of x and a given value. So for example, when you see find the absolute deviation where given value is 9 and the absolute deviation is 7. What we're going to do is we're going to write it like this. So our given value is 9. So remember, it's always x minus the given value. So I'm going to minus 9. And then that's going to be equal to then 7. And so what we would do then is we would solve by having x minus 9 is equal to 7, and then x minus 9 is going to be equal to negative 7. And then, so x is equal to 16, and x is going to be equal to then positive 2. Now let's talk about then what this absolute deviation actually means. So if we were to draw on a number line, and I would have the 9, and then the absolute deviation could go up 7, and notice how that brought you to 16, and that is one of our solutions here. And then if I subtracted then 7 from the other side, that's going to get me to 2, and then notice how that is my other solution. So in between here, the absolute deviation is 7. So it's going to be on both sides. I'm going to have a 7, and I'm going to have subtracting a 7 as well. All right, so we've got the absolute given value is 5, and the absolute deviation is 9. So it's going to be x minus 5 is equal to 9. So we're going to then x minus 5 is equal to 9, and then x minus 5 is equal to negative 9. And again, we'll solve. X is equal to then 14. And then we're going to solve on the other one. And x is equal to negative 4. All right, number 3, an essay for a scholarship application is required to be 350 words long with the absolute deviation of 20 words. What is the acceptable range for the length of the essay? So we're going to have then, on our number line, we're going to have an essay of 350. Now, it says that an absolute deviation of 20. What that means then is that you can have 20 more words. So you could add 20, and we would get then 370 words. And then, or we could have minus 20, which would be then 330 words. So the acceptable length of your essay could be 330 to 370 words, because that absolute deviation of 20 is going to let you have plus 20 or minus 20. All right, a radio morning show must take a commercial break for 2.5 minutes with an absolute deviation of 30 seconds. What is the range of allowable lengths for the commercial break? All right, so it has to be then 2.5 minutes long with an absolute deviation of 30 seconds. So remember, 30 seconds is a half of a minute. So if I'm going to add 30 seconds, I would then have a 3-minute commercial. And then if I were to subtract 30 seconds, which is again a half a minute, I would then have a 2-minute commercial. So our acceptable lengths would be anywhere from 2 to 3 minutes for that commercial. So in this lesson, we took a look at how to solve absolute value equations.